This is Movietone. Leslie Mitchell reporting.
When the 8th Army advanced into Tunisia, leaving the desert and a series of magnificent desert victories behind them, everyone knew that more weeks of very hard fighting lay ahead. As their own commander said, the eyes of the world were upon them as they approached the formidable defenses at Mareth. One of the most spectacular features of the 8th Army's progress has been the speed with which each new attack has been mounted. The rapid reinforcements of material, tanks, guns, ammunition and supplies of all kinds. A huge task magnificently carried out, and that was the foundation of victory in the desert and again before Mareth. With such a fine supply organization behind them, the fighting men of the 8th Army have done the rest. Over there in the distance are the hills of Mareth, defended by that skillful leader, Marshal Rommel. And here, men of the 8th Army taken on the eve of the general attack on the Mareth line. All ready and all quiet, waiting for nightfall and the barrage. That night barrage, reminiscent of Alamein, paved the way for the infantry assault, which at once achieved a local success at the end of the line near the sea. But our difficulties were immense. There were many anti-tank ditches to be negotiated, naturally, and also there were the ravines of the Wadi Zigzag. Nevertheless, the 8th Army did the job. Royal Engineers worked in relays under heavy shell fire. As well as taping a path through a minefield, they're blasting and digging away for tanks to cross over. The whole position was, of course, a mass of trenches and wire, tank traps and pillboxes, and the infantry smashed right into the lot in the face of heavy fire. There was very bloody fighting here, with many casualties on both sides. British and German wounded wait together to be taken to the advanced dressing station. A German whose left hand has been blown off gets a cigarette from an 8th Army man. One of our own boys, with a shell splinter wound in the chest and another in the calf of his leg, yet he walked back to the ADS on his own. Yes, very bloody fighting before the foremost Mareth positions were taken, and there was evidence of the speed of the attack in all the stuff abandoned by the enemy. Yet after all, the defenses here were so tough that the Germans succeeded in a counterattack which recovered most of the ground. Meanwhile, however, General Montgomery, seen with General Freiberg, the New Zealand commander, had decided not to continue this operation, but to strengthen the flank attack already launched in the Jebel Tabaga in the direction of El Hamma. This is part of the columns winding round behind the hills. As we know now, it was this outflanking movement against El Hamma which defeated El Rommel. Here again, there was very heavy fighting. What with the shelling and the bombing, it certainly wasn't a picnic, and there was a certain amount of bombing, for although the RAF were well on top, the Hun was sending over Ju-88s instead of his favorite Stukas, and they did their worst. The 8th Army did their best against them, and their best is pretty hot. And the RAF supported the Army with all its customary North African thoroughness. For example, Spitfires in operation as fighter bombers, raiding and strafing all day long, gave the Hun hell. Bostons and Baltimores flew in over land and sea to blast Rommel's hard-pressed troops. And at El Hamma, they absolutely flattened him. Altogether an unprecedented blitz and a masterpiece of RAF Army cooperation. All this time, the Americans, under General Patton, had been advancing staunchly in a drive to the east from Gafsa and El Guettar. This drew off large forces both from Rommel and von Arnim, who held the mountain defiles in considerable strength. The Americans took Sened and continued their push, a serious threat to Rommel's rear. They took McNassy and again continued to advance eastward. Here's an interesting shot symbolizing the junction with the British, which the 8th Army's victory has since made possible. A British brigadier with American officers taken earlier on during the advance. American airmen were also very much in the picture. A force of Mitchell's, for example, on his way to join the RAF's blitzing of retreating Germans and Italians. With the support from the Americans and with superb cooperation in the air, General Montgomery had brought off another great victory at the Battle of Mareth, since followed by further brilliant successes. He was through the Gabes Gap, and his prisoners, numbering thousands, came along in groups of hundreds at a time. Germans who had fought hard, crack German troops who had been outfought by the men of the 8th Army. Men who, having driven Rommel and the Afrika Korps out of Egypt, right across Libya and out of Mareth, are now heading for the last roundup in Africa.